What's up, fourth graders? I am back and we are ready now for part 2 here. So let me get my presentation up and running. So we just got done talking about the Paleo Indians, which were the very first Native Americans in North America. And now we're going to actually talk about some of the Indian tribes that were found in Ohio. So these are the ancestors of the Paleo Indians. Okay, the first is the Shawnee tribe, and they lived down in the southern Ohio Valley in the late 1600s. Okay, so the southern Ohio Valley, that would be down in what would be kind of Kentucky now. Okay, maybe parts of Ohio, but mostly Kentucky. Okay, eventually they were driven out by the Iroquois. The Iroquois became really the big and powerful tribe at the time, so they kind of kicked a lot of others out. Okay, they were friends with the Wyandots, and they allied with the French and the British traders. Remember way back when we talked about the French and Indian War, that whole war was because both the French and the British wanted to trade furs with the Indians, okay? And the Shawnees were some of them that they traded with, okay? They were very fierce warriors, okay? They feared and respected, or they were feared and respected by other tribes, okay? Because they were very fierce warriors, okay? Now, in the last video, we talked about how they didn't use bow and arrows. That was the Paleo Indians. Okay, now we're getting into more of the what we would call the newer Indians, I guess, or the more modern Indians. Now we do start to see the use of bow and arrows. Okay, they still use spears, and now they actually use stone tomahawks, which a tomahawk is kind of just like an axe. Shawnees lived in wigwams, and basically what a wigwam was, it was just kind of like a round little hut, okay, that was usually made out of sticks and mud. Okay, they had council houses in the center, okay, which they called the plaza. And what that meant is there were a couple of Indians or Native Americans in the village that were kind of considered the leaders. And then obviously there was the chief, okay, and they would meet in these council houses. Okay. Moving on. Oh, sorry, I got to stretch here. Okay, the men were the ones that went out and hunted. Okay, they would usually hunt for deer and turkeys. Okay, we're way past the Ice Age, so the mammoths and the mastodons and the giant bears, those are all gone. Okay, now we've kind of got the more traditional animals that we still have today. Okay, so while the men hunted, the women planted squash and corn. Okay, so remember our Paleo Indians, they did not plant any crops. Well, these Indians now are planting crops. Okay, they've evolved, they've gotten smarter. Okay, so now they're starting to plant crops. Okay, women also made medicines. Okay, they usually were the ones that built the home. And they used the hunted animals in many, many ways, okay? They would take their fur and their hide and they would use it for clothes and other things, okay? They would take their bones and make tools, okay? They were very resourceful, okay? Shawnees made and traveled in canoes. You'll notice that a lot of Indian tribes do that. And they use pack dogs, and what that means is they use dogs to help them hunt, okay? Women wore skirts with leggings, men wore breechcloths and leggings, okay? And all Shawnees wore moccasins to keep their feet warm, especially in the winter months. Okay. Sometimes they were bearded with headbands, with a feather too. So, you probably think of like the typical, stereotypical Indian has, the feathers. The Shawnees were ones that did that. Okay. And they usually painted designs on their face. So if you see this picture here, this is what a typical Shawnee Indian might look like. Kind of scary, right? Lastly, they were known for their beadwork, their pottery, and their wood carving, okay? So, they would get bored, and this is what they would do, okay? They would make art. This was their art that they used to make back then. Okay, they had clans for farming and war, okay? So different tribes would kind of join together for clans, okay? And they were able to do that because they all spoke the same language, which was Algonquin, okay? They all spoke Algonquin. And like we mentioned, they used spears, tomahawks, and bows and arrows. Our next Indian tribe, I'm getting a call. It's from my mom. I'll call her back later. Next Indian tribe is the Miami tribe. And if you look where they live, it's actually the Maumee Valley, which is the Maumee River. They lived right along the Maumee River. Do we know any towns or cities that are along the Maumee? Oh, that's right, us, duh. Okay, the Miami Indians lived right here where we live, okay? They were known for being great farmers, just like many Henry County farmers are great farmers, okay? They would grow white corn, beans, and squash. They hunted for buffalo. Believe it or not, back during this time, buffalo still lived in this area. Obviously, that's not true anymore, okay? Like the Shawnees, they used tomahawk spears and bows and arrows as well. They lived in oval houses or wigwams, as we know. Okay. The women were the ones that farmed, just like with the Shawnees, while the men would go out and hunt. Okay. Women would also make peace treaties and organize the religious festivals. Okay. So while all the men were out hunting and trying to get food, the women were the ones that were kind of the party planners, if you will. Okay. The Miamis, just like the Shawnees, they also made canoes and they used pack dogs. Okay. And then they use what we call a travaux. Okay. And a travaux is, if you look right here, basically like a dog is, okay, it's pulling this little machine that they built with 2 sticks. That way that it can create little trenches in the dirt so that they could plant seeds. And that's called a travaux. Okay. More of their clothing. Okay. Men wore cloth shirts, leggings, and breechcloths. Men also wore big earrings, nose rings, and had face paint. Okay. Mohawks were often accustomed to in the Miami tribe. So if you look here, this is what the typical Miami Indian would look like. You can see their massive earrings. Okay. They've got this big necklace with some teeth all around it. Okay. Kind of scary looking as well. Not as scary as the Shawnee, though, in my opinion. Women wore skirts, or shirts, skirts, and capes that were all decorated up. Okay. Both men and women had tattoos. Okay. So now we're starting to see the first humans actually put tattoos in their bodies. And they wore moccasins. Like the Shawnees, they did a lot of beadwork and embroidery with art. Okay. Quilling from porcupines. Okay. They were able to take the quills from porcupines and they were actually able to sew things using the quills kind of like needles. Okay. And to pass the time, they usually did a lot of storytelling or they had some games. Only men in the Miami could be the chiefs. Okay. There would be 2 different chiefs. Okay. One main chief, which was hereditary, meaning that it was passed on from father to son. And then when that son grew up, then his son, and so on and so on. That'd be the one main chief. Okay. But then there's also a war chief, and that'd kind of be like a general. Okay. And he was like the really skilled one. Okay. The one that could do everything. He was a great hunter. He was the best in battles. Okay. He was considered the war chief. So those 2 would kind of work together. Our next Indian tribe is the Delaware. Okay. And they first lived along the Delaware River, which is in present-day New Jersey. Okay. They were also known as the Lenape, okay, which means the true people. Okay. The Delawares aligned with the French. Remember again with the French and Indian War, they aligned on the French side. Okay. And then there were 3 clans of the Delaware: the Turtle, the Wolf, and the Turkey. Okay. The Delaware, they also lived in wigwams, but they also lived in what we called longhouses. Okay. So here's kind of what a wigwam would look like. Okay. And then here is what a longhouse would look like. It's kind of like a wigwam, just a little bit longer and maybe a little bit taller. Okay. They actually built log walls around their village for protection. So if you look at this picture, you can see they put all these logs up kind of as like a fence to protect their village from any invaders. Okay. They were actually called the grandfathers by other tribes because they were one of the oldest Algonquin tribes. So again, they also spoke Algonquin, but they were one of the very first tribes that spoke Algonquin. Okay, they protect their families. Obviously, everyone's going to protect their families, right? Okay, women chose the chief who was from the Turtle clan. Okay, they had medicine men, which would be men that would travel from clan to clan, and he would actually provide them with herbs and stuff to help them get better if they were sick. They made fur for cookware and guns with European, or they traded their fur for cookware and guns with European settlers. Sorry. Okay, so like we talked about way back, fur trade was huge. Okay, and that's when they were actually able to get their first guns, was by trading their furs. The Delaware hunted deer, elk, and turkey. Okay, so even elk back in the day used to be kind of in this area. Okay, they planted what they called the 3 sisters. Okay, kind of the 3 main crops at the time, which was squash, corn, and beans. Like the other tribes, they used bow and arrows. Okay, they also use wooden war clubs, which is basically just a big wooden stick that they would use if they had to fight against another tribe. They would make shields out of moose hide because moose hide is very, very tough and very strong. Okay, and then they use canoes as well. Like the other Indian tribes, they beaded. Okay, made a lot of things out of beads like headbands or belts. Okay. Next tribe is the Wyandot, also known as the Huron, okay? The Wyandot tribe actually started in Canada, and then they migrated down into northern Ohio, kind of where we are today, okay? They lived in longhouses, okay, kind of like the Delawares did. They formed alliances with the Shawnee, okay? So remember the Shawnee, they lived down in the southern Ohio Valley, okay? And then we have, excuse me, our Wyandots up here with our Shawnee, okay? And they were actually able to form an alliance, okay? They were very fierce warriors, and they did not like Europeans coming into their areas, okay? So if the Europeans were trying to move in, the Wyandots were going to fight back. They did not like it at all, okay? They also had canoes, and they actually did a lot of fishing on those canoes, okay? They lived very close to Lake Erie, the Wyandots did, so they were able to actually go out on the lakes in their canoes and do some fishing. They used bow and arrows and spears as well, and they actually used big nets to help them fish and gather lots of fish at one time, okay? The chief wore a big feathered cap, like if you know the big headdresses that you think that most Indians have. The Wyandot chiefs did do that. They also painted their faces and bodies and used tribal tattoos. Okay, a lot of Indian tribes did that, and they made pottery, baskets, and beadwork as well. Next, we have the Ottawa Indians. The Ottawa people originally came from the Ottawa River in Ontario, Canada. So they also came from Canada, and then they moved south. Okay, they moved to northern Ohio to get away from those Iroquois that I talked about a little bit ago. Okay, the Iroquois were the really powerful tribe at the time, and they were going out and they were really spreading, and so they were forcing other Indian tribes to move. Okay, the Ottawas were the only historic Indians to live in teepees. Believe it or not, most Indians did not live in teepees. I know it seems like everyone thinks that Indians all lived in teepees, and most of them did not actually. The Ottawas were the only historic Indians to do it. Okay, the men would fish, okay, and hunted, and then the women would grow the food back home. Okay, we're kind of seeing that theme that usually the men went out and hunted, the women stayed home and did, you know, the growing and the making of tools and stuff like that. Some of the tools that the Ottawas did use, okay, they would use shields that were covered with animal skin. They also used bow and arrows, clubs, and they made hooks from bones to help them fish. Okay, what did the Ottawa Indians wear? Okay, they would wear robes made of rabbit skin in the winter to help keep them warm. Okay, men would walk around without clothes to show how tough they were. Ew, kind of gross. They covered their bodies with tribal tattoos, and they painted their faces. And here's just a little example of what tattoos might look like. Okay, the women wore their hair in one long braid, so they would have a really long braid that their hair would be in. They both wore moccasins, and then the men usually wore long headdresses over their mohawks. So if you can see here, the longer the headdress, okay, the more powerful you were kind of considered. And that is all I've got for you, fourth grade. So that's it. Have a great Wednesday. Peace.